Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of our Prove, Prevent, Protect LCV Solutions webinar series. It is the final episode. So if you've missed any of the first two, please don't forget to go on YouTube and check them out. They've been an excellent series so far, and we've had some really great feedback with some really quality content in there and a lot for people to learn from. So what will we be covering today? Today we have 3 excellent guests yet again. We've got Peter Baker from the Energy Saving Trust, who will be looking at fleet electrification. As most fleets now are only 2 or possibly 3 cycles away from having to go electric, how that transition can be smoothed. We've got Alastair Brodie from Vallourec, who is looking at actually, once you've looked at digitising your fleet by going electric, how can you help and assist by digitising your processes as well by using one of Webfleet's integration partners, Formistica. And then myself, I will be the final presenter, and I will be speaking about how can you get the most from your telematics in terms of digitization, so that when you do electrify your fleet or go electric, that you get the most from it and you know which vehicles to transition first. So a little bit of housekeeping. We would invite you to please, that you will see a chat box in GoToWebinar. Type in your questions as you go along. And after each presentation, we will give a short question and answer session with a larger question and answer session at the end. So please do type in your questions. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Peter Baker from the Energy Saving Trust. If you'd like to come on camera, Peter.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. So
thanks, Matthew.
Over to you.
Introduction. Appreciate it. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So today I'm just going to talk about digitalization and how that can help you transition to electric vehicles within your fleet. So a bit about myself. I work within the technical team at the Energy Saving Trust, and just quickly go over what the Energy Saving Trust does. So we're an independent organization that, with our main aim, which is working to address the climate emergency. So within this area, we mostly look at energy efficiency, renewable transport, and we also look at kind of looking at urban and domestic heating is another area we kind of focus on. So what does the transport team, which I sit in at the Energy Saving Trust, do? We provide a lot of advice to organizations that are running fleets, businesses, how to reduce their costs, their emissions, and transition towards electric vehicles. We also manage a lot of incentives and programs. A lot of this is from government organizations to enhance the uptake of electric vehicles. And this quite often comes in the form of interest-free loans and other things like that, which can help organizations and businesses make that transition. So what actually is digitalization when it comes to fleets? This generally means installing and operating telematics systems within your fleet. So telematics is a technology which most often comes in the form of a GPS tracker but has additional functionality to it, which is used to monitor a wide range of information related to your individual vehicle or your fleet. So how can digitalization and telematics help you transition your fleet to electric vehicles? How can it do this before you even make that first decision? So when electric vehicles are implemented based on the analysis of really good quality fleet usage data, there's generally little noticeable or none at all impact on your business as usual activities. This is because telematic systems should provide you with all of the necessary data you need to make well-informed decisions. So having this in place, is almost a crucial and fundamental element of making that transition towards electric vehicles. So how is this kind of done? How does that work? So telematics provide you with the following really crucial information. So the first of all is quite simple. It just gives you your daily mileages of the vehicles that you're operating. This is crucial as essentially, as we know, electric vehicles have certain range capabilities, and And having that daily mileage and knowing how far your vehicles are traveling, you can choose the appropriate vehicles that you think would be ready to be replaced by an electric vehicle with current technology that's out there at the minute. Very related to that, and quite a similar point, is you can also figure out your maximum required range. So you can look at all of your vehicles you're operating, see how far they're traveling on a maximum trip range, and if these vehicles are traveling under 300 miles, under 200 miles on a trip, or even less, they're probably capable of being changed for electric vehicle, as this is what technology can achieve at this moment in time. Further to this, it will also give you a really strong idea of where your opportunities for recharging are. So by looking at the telematics data, which is the GPS data, you can figure out areas where your vehicles are stopping on regular occasions. So that could be a really good, appropriate area to install charging infrastructure, which is, again, is a really important factor when thinking about transitioning to your EVs, where you're going to charge and where those opportunities are going to be. You can also have a look at where the nearest public charging infrastructure is related to where your vehicles normally stop as well. And then on top of this, it will give you a good chance to forecast your energy requirements at charging locations. If you see that 6 vehicles are most likely going to be using one charging area or charging infrastructure, you can then figure out how much energy you're actually going to need to charge those vehicles there, and figure out if that's possible, or if you can maybe have to adapt your routes. So once you have this information that we've just discussed, I've kind of already gone over this a little bit, but you can choose the appropriate replacement electric vehicle based on ranges. If you're just driving around urban areas, you could choose a vehicle that maybe has a smaller range, like 200 miles, 150 miles. But if you need that longer range, you can choose a vehicle that has 300 miles, maybe a little bit more. Again, you can choose the best location for your charging infrastructure. Within this, you can then choose the appropriate charging infrastructure, which type of charger you want to use, whether you want to use fast, medium, or not so quick. And then another probably really crucial thing you can do with this data is this allows you to calculate the lifetime cost and carbon savings by switching to electric vehicles. And again, switching to EVs is, in my opinion, a really positive thing, but I completely understand that you need to have a business case for this. You need to be able to prove that by doing this, you're actually going to save your organization or your business money, which is really crucial. And then when it comes to, reporting, and especially kind of sustainability reporting, showing your carbon savings as well is another really important thing, which shouldn't be underestimated. So once you've made this transition to electric vehicles, how can then telematics help you run this fleet effectively? So operating telematics will help you optimize your electric fleet in the following ways. So firstly, it will allow you to choose the appropriate vehicle for the appropriate job. So if you have 10, 20 different EVs that all have a different state of charge or have different range capabilities, in the morning or before you head out, you can choose which vehicle which goes on which job based on what you need that vehicle to do on that day, which is pretty crucial. It also allows you to choose your charging priorities. Which vehicles need to be charged? You have a state of charge, so the amount of battery left in each vehicle at the end of the day or the end of the working period, and this will allow you to charge which vehicle you think you need to charge to get everything done the next day. It will also help you maximize your range and correct driver patterns if those aren't kind of correct. So in order to get the maximum amount of range from an EV, you need to drive it in a certain way, which is slow braking and essentially not driving too quick. So you can notice telematics will pick up on negative driver behaviors in terms of range, and then you can correct those either by driver training or whichever way you see that fit, but education is normally the way forward there. And then this will give you a really strong data set to perform some data analysis and some reporting. It will give you the costs and the carbon savings. Again, needs to go to the accountants, and also will give you a really kind of strong basis to report on any needs you need to with that data. So just a quick thing, again, to fully utilize this data that's going to come out of telematics systems, best thing to do is get someone trained and confident using that system. And then once you have that all available, there's a wealth of knowledge and insights that you can get from using your telematics system. Just on a bit of brief conclusion there, I think telematics and digitalization is crucial when it comes to transitioning towards electric vehicles. This is quite a big modal shift in terms of the way that businesses are going to be operating their fleets, and having the solid data there to make well-informed decisions is, can't be understated, in my opinion. So don't just take my word for it. Here's a survey response that I've just sent out to all the fleet managers in Scotland of public sector fleets, councils operating over 50, 100 vehicles, electric vehicles. And yet 70% strongly agree that having telematics fitted to vehicles is an essential component of modern fleet management. Okay, so now that we've gone over that, just going to talk over quickly how the Energy Saving Trust can support you making this transition. So the first thing, and I think the most important, is the fleet review service that we offer. So this is, if you want to make, or you want to kind of research into making this transition for your company or organization, this is the perfect place to start. So what we will do, if you get in contact with us, we'll offer you a fleet review, and this service will calculate the annual carbon footprint of your current fleet and provide you recommendations on how you can immediately begin the process of decarbonisation. This is a completely free service, and all we need from you is some basic data on your current fleet and how far the daily mileages are or yearly mileages are, and that's all we need to get started. So it's a really quick, basic process, and it'll be a great place to start your transition towards electric vehicles. So we also offer, this is England specific, eco driver training. So as I said there, if you do notice that your current fleet, and maybe you're not driving the vehicles efficiently or effectively, this is a great way to encourage positive driving styles, which will reduce bills, cut carbon emissions, and will lower accident rates. This is another scheme that we've got, the Low Carbon Transport Business Loan. This is Scotland specific. So if you're up in Scotland, this one is available to you. So that's an interest-free loan of up to £120,000, and which can be used either to adopt pure electric vehicles, electric motorcycles or scooters, electric or plug-in hybrid heavy good vehicles. And another important one there is that it can actually be used to purchase telematics systems for your fleets. This is actually closed at the minute, as a lot of our schemes do close at the end of the financial year until funding is reconfirmed for the next financial year. So it is closed at the minute, but if you are interested, please do get in touch, and we'll let you know as soon as that opens up again. And then here's another Scotland specific one, sorry to everyone else. This is the non-public workplace charge point funding, which allows organisations are eligible for grant support to install the charge point if they meet those following criteria there. So basically, if you operate electric vehicles, you can get support to install charging infrastructure. And then here's just a quick overview of how, if you're interested or want more information on any of those schemes, these are the kind of routes to get in touch with us. There's quite a lot there to take in now, but I think all of this will be put on the YouTube or wherever this is posted afterwards, so you can follow those links. And just lastly, I don't think the next slide's coming up, but my email address is coming up next. So there we go. If you do want to get in touch, just let me know, shoot me an email or pop one into the general information inbox there, and I'll be happy to get in touch with anyone and discuss. So that's everything from me.
Perfect, Peter. Thanks very much. Yeah, so just to clarify, when we post this video, this webinar on YouTube afterwards, all of the links that Peter has put in his presentation will be available in the description for you to follow up with Peter directly. We've had some questions coming in already, Peter. One of which is obviously the car side of electric vehicles is kind of getting to the stage where it's maturing quite considerably. When you're speaking to businesses, how many businesses are you actually starting to speak to about vans? Is it increasing in popularity, or is it still mostly cars?
Vans are still, they're a very big part of what we are dealing with at the minute and who we're talking to, especially when we look from my specific area of knowledge, which is the kind of public sector fleets in Scotland. So a lot of those fleets have already transitioned to EVs almost completely, and a significant proportion of those are vans. And we found that although there can be some teething problems with range and charging infrastructure, once those have been addressed properly through route optimization and driver training, generally vans are just as viable for larger fleets at the minute as cars are. The support there for vans is maybe a little bit less well developed than it is for cars, especially when it comes to the plug-in grant. More money seems to be funneled towards cars than vans at the minute, but I think the support for vans will be longer lasting than the support for cars. This is actually just my personal opinion, by the way. So I think it is possible, and we are seeing that the technology for vans is improving year on year, especially when it comes to range and payload. And again, this is something I actually picked up from someone else, is that I think British Gas have been operating their fleet pretty much fully electrified vans for the last 5 years, and I don't think they've had any breakdowns in those 5 years. Don't quote me on that. You might have to ask them directly, but
just say if that's true, that's a very impressive statistic.
Yeah.
So, sorry, a question that's just come in and popped up has been, you mentioned with regards to public sector, how important is it within winning public sector business that you can prove that you are reducing your CO2 emissions? Is it how closely are they starting to look at it?
It's always quite an important factor. I think initially, cost is normally, when it comes to a business sense, cost is obviously quite often the most important factor. Understandably, as a business has to operate as a business, but then as generally the general population and workforce and the board of companies and public sector and private sector organizations are becoming more aware of this need to transition to electric vehicles with the climate emergency, and it's an important factor, and it's something that's really useful to indicate and report on, even internally and externally. So yeah, it's something I definitely recommend keeping track of, and yeah, pretty much.
No, that's excellent. Thank you very much. Right, so we are now going to move on to our next presenter, Alastair. So after speaking about how you can digitize your fleet, we're now going to have a look at how you can digitize some of your internal processes and some of the benefits that can have within your organization. Good morning, Alastair. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Matthew. Thank you very much.
Excellent. We're looking forward to what you have to say.
Okay, no problem. So how do I just go down next page? Okay, so first of all, my name is Alastair Brodie. I'm working for 30 years for a steel company. It's an international steel company. Headquarters are in Paris, and we manufacture around 2 million tons of steel per year from either raw materials or from metal scraps. 70% of our business is oil and gas, so kind of the opposite from what Peter's been talking about, I guess. But obviously, like most companies, we're transitioning into new forms of energy, and where our steel tubes can have an impact, whether it be carbon capture and underground storage, or geothermal, or just frames for solar farms. We've got around 19,000 employees, and I just work for a very small department, which is the service department. So we've got about 200 technicians. They work offshore on oil and gas platforms, drilling rigs, or just in workshops. The 200 technicians are based in 11 countries, close to the markets, and we're trying to make sure that we all operate to the same set of standards and procedures and reporting, because that's what our international customers expect of us. So I have to confess, we don't have any vehicles. We don't have fleets of vehicles. The work is it's not that type of work. Having said that, we do transport goods from our 2 million tons of goods from our factories to our customers, mostly by boat. In the UK, we have just a finishing line where we thread the pipes, and that means taking 20,000 tons of steel from Edinburgh to Lanarkshire for finishing, and then up to Aberdeen, which equates to around 200 trucks per year. Sorry, 2,000 trucks per year. They're not our trucks. We load them and they're collected by subcontractors. Recently, we've had problems with loading finished goods onto a truck, which resulted in delays at Aberdeen Harbour, and then that has a knock-on effect with ships, waiting for problems to be solved, or worse, could be drilling rigs waiting for goods to arrive. So if we go to the next slide. So we started using, as a company, or as a department, I should say, we started using Firmistica in 2015. I guess we were an early adopter at that stage. We've got 230 users, and over that 5-year period, these users have submitted around 130,000 forms. Of course, we'd started small, and we're always increasing the number of use cases and the number of users as well, and departments that are using it. But so having started small, we're averaging around 2,200 form submissions a month. This 130,000 forms would have normally been 3 or 4 sheets of paper, and that people would have filled in at work sites for various reasons. So we could say we've saved 50,000 sheets of paper per year. I don't know what the cost of printing that is, but clearly that's made a bit of a difference. We're using Firmistica quite a lot as well to deploy forms onto cell phones, and then use the camera built into the cell phone to capture photographs. In the past, where people took photographs and emailed them, the photos ended up, maybe they got saved in a directory somewhere, or maybe they got pasted onto a report, but they were never searchable or tagged or anything like this. So now, using Firmistica, we can take a photograph, we can have many fields associated with that photograph that effectively tags them and allows them to be searched in the future. The picture in the bottom just shows the Firmistica form page. You can see there's our top 10 forms, I think. And we've got, so they've been used for safety checklists. We can see 28,000 forms submitted. Risk assessments, 21,000 forms. The next one is a Portuguese one, in Brazil, which is safety. I think that's a safety observation as well. Exam certificates, a lot of safety stuff, as you can see. But used for lots of other reasons. I'm going to speak about 3 or 4 of those use cases shortly. If we go on to the next slide. So one of the first use cases we had was using Firmistica to create knowledge exams for the technicians. So we've always we've a requirement to send competent people to the work site, and they're doing quality or safety critical jobs on an offshore platform typically. So we need to have evidence of their knowledge and skill, and the knowledge, for evidence of knowledge, we examine the technicians using, in the past we used to give them a paper exam which they sat down and answered, and then manually afterwards I had to go through the exam papers with a red pen and add up the results and what have you. We quickly realized that Formistica could be a great tool for doing that. So using the fields, single multi-choice fields, integers, true, false, yes, no type answers, we were able to automate the exams or to issue the exams to the technicians on their phones or computers or whatever. We use single use forms that kind of dissolve effectively after the exam has been submitted, so they can't have multiple attempts at it. We give the technicians about 30 exams every 2 or 3 years with roughly an average 30 questions each. So that's that form. Over the last few years, we've had 881,000 exam questions have been asked and answered. We use the form actions, which is going on in the background. So once a form is submitted, we have an action that takes place. We quite often use Microsoft Excel to automate the action. So the form results go into an Excel spreadsheet. There's a very simple formula that says if the answer submitted is the correct answer, then 1 point, failing that, 0 points. And then using Excel, we can add up the scores, and then Formistica quite nicely puts that Excel into a PDF and then can email it to the candidate as a result, or can email it to the adjudicator listing the questions that were got wrong or whatever. So these knowledge exam forms have, in the past, it used to take me, 5 seconds to mark and report each question. So that equates to around 1,200 hours of time saving, because now I don't need to manually mark the exam papers at all. We just deploy the exam every 3 years to the technicians. They do the exam and automatically get the results, and then I can output that to, as I said, to whatever way I like, Power BI or to Excel, and see the big data behind it. If we want to go to the next use case, please. So another one is observing safety incidents or unsafe acts or positive safety culture. We try to use the DuPont methodology to record at-risk behaviours. You know, the triangle where for every fatality you have 300,000 at-risk behaviours. So we try to get the technicians to be observant on safety all the time, and then to report, to observe, and to make those observations searchable and traceable through by using Formistica. So the technicians on the phone have a multi-use form that every time they see an unsafe act or positive culture as well, they can comment on it, photograph perhaps what they're looking at, and you saw on the second slide, I think, that we've got about 30,000 safety observations made. These observations can then be looked at statistically and see where the risks are lying, what type of safety behaviour, positive and negative, is being reported, and try and report, discuss that individual incidents or the big data at monthly safety meetings. So the technicians are pretty good at grabbing their phone and filling in forms and submitting them when they see something to report. The next use case. So this next use case is where, before we assign a technician to any task, we need to do a risk assessment to make sure we're putting the right people on the right jobs. We do this again through Formistica, where we've got a form that the back office staff fill, the people allocating, the admin staff allocating people to jobs, and in these forms we embed images to remind people what are the risk ratings that they have to use, and and the mitigation processes there's prompts for these as well. And so again, this is another form that gets used every day, tens of times a day, hundreds of times per day perhaps, and allows us to, we're using different types of fields and different, with the form is deployed with logos with instructions built into it. And as I say, with images similar to the exam papers, we can embed images into the form itself. So this form, once it's submitted, has to be recorded for archiving reasons. In case of a future claim or something like this, in the past we used to print the form off, we used to sign it, we used to scan it, and then we uploaded it onto a database. All that's just done instantly as soon as the form's filled. It's there's form actions that convert it to a PDF. They take automatically the signatures from the user login and upload it through a file transfer method to the database. I think there was about 20,000 of these risk assessments, so you can work that out at 5 minutes per time is a good few hundred hours of time saving. And the next risk use case, last one. So just recently, the guys in one of the stockyards in Scotland have had a claim from a customer where a truck wasn't loaded properly. It gave difficulties to the harbour staff in Aberdeen, and there was a knock-on effect. So the guys in the yard themselves decided they wanted to use Formistica to grab evidence that every truck leaving the factory had an inspection. So this picture was taken by using Formistica, but they take for each truck leaving the factory, they take 2 or 3 pictures that are mandatory of each loadout. And then if there's a problem, they've got the option to add extra pictures to identify the problem. They color code using a red, yellow, green field action on Formistica to assess the risk, and then that gets reported to the management if there's a problem. So that's just another use case. I think we've only been using it for the last week or two. So again, we've got all these photographs as evidence that the truck at least left our factory in good condition, and we can show that to customers as required. So just to sum up, the next slide, if you don't mind. So since 2015, these technicians have collected 5.7 million pieces of data, whether it's text, it's from drop-down menus, it's numerical numbers, it's photographs, whatever. We use a Formistica application program interface, an API, to grab that data from Formistica and visualize it normally using Microsoft Power BI or other tools to see the big data behind it and see trends. And in total, a couple of weeks ago when I looked at it, we had 460,000 business transactions that have been automated through the form actions. So when a form's submitted, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 actions sometimes that were previously manual, where a form would be sent to somebody or emailed or uploaded to a database or something like this, photocopied even, and these actions have now been completely automated thanks to this software. So it's been a huge advantage to us using Formistica over the last few years, and we continue to find good use cases going forward, as I expect the number of users and the number of use cases to grow exponentially. So I think that's everything on my side. Are there any? I see some questions.
So thank you very much for that, Alastair. That was excellent. One of the questions that has come in was that since you've been digitising the processes and using the forms rather than manual processes. Have you had much in the way of positive feedback from customers, just in terms of how you're able to service them from being able to take photos of how you've loaded a truck, for example? Have your customers benefited as well as the time you've saved internally?
Well, to be honest with you, we've only been doing the truck loading form for the last couple of weeks, and we've been doing it to grab evidence in case, as has happened in the past, in case the customer has a complaint when they're offloading the truck at the other end. So since we've been using it, we've not had to provide that evidence so far. But when we did have a problem last year with it ended up a 4-hour delay at the harbour, and normally those trucks would have just been returned to us. They would have sent 20 trucks back down the road, but because they were desperate for them on the rig, they had to unload them, and we did not have the evidence that we should have had to show that to show what had happened with us. So we haven't created an action on that form so far that sends the output to the customer. It's just, at the moment, it's just for internal data gathering. But yeah, we can replay actions anyway and send it automatically to customers.
Yeah, I think that the really key takeaway here for all of our van fleet operators is that although you don't necessarily operate a fleet yourself, actually there's a whole host of transferable takeaways in terms of being able to digitize any forms that you're currently doing in a paper-based platform. I mean, for example, it could be you are doing a risk assessment before one of your engineers arrives on a site to do any sort of work, or if you were a service and maintenance engineer of some sort, for like a boiler serviceman, for example, getting those job completion certificates signed and instantly sent, saving huge amounts of time where traditionally a piece of paper would have had to come back to the office and then be typed into the system by someone to order parts and manage everything else. It just makes that whole transition a lot slicker and easier. One of the questions that has come in, Alastair, is did you find that the transition to being a COVID secure business was actually much easier because you were using digital forms rather than paper-based ones?
To be honest with you, I haven't really thought about it like that, but of course, yeah, our office has been closed for best part of a year now, so we haven't had access to the printers or to the office infrastructure that we normally have. We still assign people to jobs, but they're not returning to the office after the jobs. They just get a phone call in the morning, and they go, they do the job, they come back in the evening, or they go away for 2 or 3 weeks at a time and come back. And yeah, because they're syncing every day the forms as they use them, then if you send somebody offshore to do a job, you don't get the paperwork back until the end of it. But now, with much more and more reporting being done using this, you can gather the data kind of almost on a daily basis, and then as long as there's a field that links, the job number on each form together, we can pull that together into quite powerful customer reports at the end, and we can deliver those reports very much quicker than we could in the past, whereas somebody would have come in and typed up a report and it would have been checked. And because the forms have a lot of prompts in them, and it forces people to take, pick one of 10 options or whatever, you're not having the same free text entry that is not searchable and full of spelling mistakes, this type of thing. We've eliminated all of that. But yeah, I mean, our work has always been remote, and but this ability to gather data on the hop and transmit it to the office has been fantastic.
Well, absolutely. I suppose it almost goes back to the customer enhancement piece we were discussing earlier. If you can pull off reports for them much quicker and easier than you were able to previously, and have much quicker turnaround times, that consequently they'll be much happier as a result. Alastair, thank you very much. We're now going to move on to part 3 of this webinar, where I'm going to be discussing and running through how telematics can help when you are looking at digitising your fleet, and actually how can it also, going back to what Peter was discussing earlier, help provide you with a business case for electrifying your fleet, how you can actually prove and gain some insight as to perhaps which vehicles you should take electric first, and what the impact of that would be to your business, both in terms of whether that be CO2 output or fuel savings by going electric rather than using the traditional diesel fuels, especially as there are more and more electric vans coming onto the marketplace. So how can telematics help? I mean, the core question really is, it assists you in answering the question, are we ready for electric vehicles? Is this something that we can incorporate into our fleet based on the points that Peter alluded to earlier in terms of what's our average trip length? What's the longest trips that each of our vehicles are doing in any one stint? And could we potentially transition to electric based on the profile of our fleet and the journeys that we're doing? So something that Webfleet have done, because we're really pioneering the way forwards with regards to electric vehicles, is to launch our fleet electrification planning report. Because as I alluded to earlier, each fleet really is only 2 or 3 year cycles, depending on how far through their vehicle replacement cycles they are, away from really seriously either having to go electric or at least having to consider and plan for it in their next replacement cycle. So what we've got here is just a copy of this report, where on the left you can see instantly at a glance that we're recommending that for this fleet, 42% of the fleet, based on their travel and usage profile, potentially could be considered for a move to becoming fully electric. And at the bottom, you'll see a summary and a total of what the impact to the business will be in terms of CO2 emissions, fuel consumption, and wasted fuel and idling. So if we just look at that a little bit more closely and translate that, because actually headline figures like that sound great, but what do they really mean for your business? And actually, in terms of CO2 emissions, £7,656 is just short of nearly 3.5 tons of carbon dioxide output saved per month, which is absolutely massive. That's a really large figure considering that's per month. So over the course of the year, you're looking to save nearly 40 tons of CO2 annually. Which, especially if you're having to report on this and provide figures of steps you're taking to green your fleet, as it were, will be really, really helpful for you in terms of what will the impact in terms of CO2 be. But not only that, the big thing, and the thing that most fleets are probably most interested in, is actually the fuel consumption, because by moving to electric, you will no longer be utilising 1,348 litres of fuel. If you include the waste, if you group together the wasted fuel spent on idling and the general fuel consumption from travel, which equates to a saving of £1,617 per month. So actually, it's not just a eco warrior, let's be nicey, let's save the planet angle, if you like, in terms of electrification. There is some real tangible potential benefits with regards to spending money on fuel, which often is a really high cost part of running an LCV fleet, especially if you're running a fleet of LCVs that are typically diesel, and let's say you are a delivery vehicle operator, for example, you're doing lots of short, sharp journeys, which typically, in terms of getting the best miles per gallon possible out of a vehicle, we're all aware that's not the most effective way of doing it. These diesel vehicles are built for long, continuous journeys on motorways to get the most effective and highest MPGs. So how did we arrive at those figures? How do we know that a vehicle is appropriate to transition to being an electric rather than a combustion engine vehicle? So we've got a report here where, for example, you'll see all of the things that Peter mentioned earlier in terms of the data that you have to look at in terms of the expected maximum daily distance. You can customize that so that if you believe that actually I want to make sure that all of my vehicles really can travel on one charge to wherever they need to go, you can see historically what that data looked like, but also with telematics, you're able to highlight the number of days that they exceed that maximum daily distance. Because it may be the case that you've got some vehicles that are doing 2,000 or 3,000 miles a month. And you think, oh, there's absolutely no way that this vehicle would be appropriate to transition to being an electric vehicle. But actually, if they're doing 2,000 or 3,000 miles, but all of those trips are short 20, 30, 40, 50 mile trips over the course of the month, theoretically, there's no reason that they couldn't, because they'd be quite comfortable getting between jobs and then getting to a charge point before they had to recharge. So this highlights, in this instance, whether there is frequent trips over the max distance that you can travel on one charge, or whether they're just outliers where actually with a little bit of sensible planning and a little bit of communication, perhaps you could look at getting an electric vehicle. And one of the really key things is that your telematics provider should be giving you advice on whether, based on the parameters you've put in, that vehicle should be able to be switched to an electric vehicle or not. It's great having the data. We know, however, that you fleet and transport managers are all very, very busy people, and that actually to have to sit down and do this analysis yourself, although potentially necessary, can be very, very time consuming. So you should have the functionality in the facility to just have at the click of a button, actually, is this one worth switching or not? Yes or no? And that's what we try to provide with our fleet electrification planning tools. So you'll see one vehicle highlighted here, which is the Skoda Kodiaq. If we just take a little bit of a look at that vehicle more closely, and sorry, I think control's been taken away from me. There we go. You'll see here we've got this same Skoda Kodiaq with a list of jobs that it would typically complete in one day. So potentially we can look at, okay, so maybe a vehicle isn't quite appropriate yet to become an electric vehicle, but surely there's still some ways that we can look at some element of digitization to help improve trip efficiency and improve efficiency within our fleet. So here we have William Wallace using his favorite method of transportation, the Skoda Kodiaq, famously, traveling in and around Inverness. You'll see in the map on the right hand side that he's got a number of jobs lined up for the day. Now, as mentioned earlier, this could be a number of service calls or it could be deliveries. But the really key bit is that if we take a little look at the summary at the bottom, you'll see that this journey, although this is the route that the driver believes is the most effective way to go about his trips that day, is actually has the potential for 20.4 miles less distance traveled. And the impact of that when you're using an electric vehicle potentially is absolutely massive, because it could be the case that that's the difference between having to go to a charge point during the middle of the day or not having to go to a charge point during the middle of the day. And the key thing actually as well is that you'll see here that it's 47 minutes less time spent traveling in the car. And that's all time that potentially you could spend doing other things as a driver, or time that potentially you could use to then squeeze in another job that day, which is extra revenue ultimately for the business. I had a case recently with one of our customers who's a charity, where they use a lot of their LCVs to go around collecting from donation banks in and around their local area, where they took on route optimization previously, because before what they did was the drivers had a list of banks where they were told, right, go collect from those banks in whatever order you feel is most appropriate. And drivers quite often would go, oh, I don't like going this to this one, then this one, because whatever reason. But actually what they established was when they physically put the routes into a route optimization analyzer and then optimized the routes, that they were able to fit in an extra 2 collections on each route, which consequently meant that they needed one less van in their fleet for the same amount of work, which, as you can imagine, for a charity, being able to reduce costs like that is hugely important. But actually there's crossover to any other fleet, because why spend more money than you have to? And if you've got an additional van spare, actually, does that mean you can now start to take on additional jobs beyond that? So what's the impact of that 20.4 miles that is not driven because of optimization? Well, actually, that works out at 3.1 litres of fuel saved per day. So here we're just looking at helping to build a business case for why bother optimizing. 3.1 litres of fuel per day is roughly £3.70. So potentially small numbers, doesn't sound like quite a lot. What that tots up to, based on an average MPG of 30 miles per gallon of a van and an average working days of 200 days a year, is £740. So you think, okay, great, £740. So what? We're a very, very large business. That's not really going to save us a lot until you realise that that figure is actually per vehicle. So very quickly, you only have to have, say, a 10 vehicle fleet, and you're saving £7,500 a year by doing the same work, but a little bit more efficiently. And similarly, I mean, if you've got a 30 vehicle fleet, for example, all of a sudden, rather than it being 7.5, you're up to £22,500 a year in terms of savings, it is really significant just by having a look at the jobs you're doing already and saying, okay, how can we have a look at doing this better? So in terms of looking at your fleet and how you can digitize and how you can start to really get the most from all of your processes, some of the key questions that you need to be asking are any of my vehicles ready to go electric? But actually beyond that, how do I know? And if you don't know and you don't have any way of analyzing it, perhaps it's worth having a look and a think about how you can take steps to get that data, to build the business case and really prove that actually that there's some potential savings and benefits from going electric. And then not only that, for the vehicles that aren't perhaps, once you've done the analysis, ready to go electric, how can I then optimize the efficiency of the ones that aren't ready? Is there anything I can do in terms of their routing or their planning or their day-to-day that I can help generate more revenue through doing it more efficiently? And then the third and final one is actually say, I've optimized everything as possible I can that's out on the road. Actually, what can I do in terms of the back office processes to save cost and save time there? Can I use an integration like Formistica to digitize forms so that all of my invoices are sent out instantly as soon as a job is completed? I mean, you may be able to answer this question already. How much does one missed invoice cost your company? Because no doubt if you've got 30 drivers out on the road, each completing 3 or 4 sheets of paper each, that's hundreds of pieces of paper per day you need to input. Alastair mentioned that 500,000 sheets of paper per year had been saved. That's a huge amount of manual labor to keep on top of, and a really something that really needs to be concentrated and looked at in a little bit more detail if you're wanting to run the most efficient and fleet you possibly can do. So thank you very much, ladies and gents. That's the end of my bit. What we will do now is I'd like to welcome back on screen Peter and Alastair, and we will run through some of the questions that you've been sending in. So if you haven't sent any questions in yet, please do send some in. I know that Peter and Alastair are really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on what you've got to say. Thanks for joining us again, Alastair and Peter. So the first question that's come in is, can Formistica, the application that Alastair went through, integrate with Webfleet? Short answer, absolutely yes, I can. Yes, it can. Formistica is one of the key integration partners of Webfleet. We partner with them specifically for form building apps for the transport and fleet sectors. And it ties in with Webfleet and can pull location data instantly, so that actually a lot of the forms that you create are auto-populated rather than, as Alastair alluded to, a driver being given free text forms where it's typed in really badly and there's spelling errors and there's no way to then audit or enhance that process in the future. So one of the next question, Alastair, this one is for you. The question is, when you went digital, did you encounter any resistance from the members of staff to replace the paper processes? And if you did, how did you overcome these objections?
To be honest with you, I don't think we did really come across any difficulties. The staff at the end of their jobs always had to return to the office to submit their paperwork, and and having those forms on their cell phone now, they're not, they're not having to return to the office, so effectively their day finishes a little bit earlier. Or and as I said, since COVID and the office having been closed, we don't really encourage them to do that anyway. But a lot of the technicians don't even live close to the office. They live around different parts of Scotland. They're assigned to a job quite often for 2 or 3 weeks offshore, and that's another thing. I mean, when they're going offshore, we need to keep our baggage weight down. They're going away for 2 weeks, and you've got a 10-kilo baggage limit on a helicopter. So humping blank sheets of paper, around onto a rig, it just adds to all the stuff that they have to carry, and then having all that on their cell phone or and we quite often give them tablet computers, explosion-proof tablet computers for the offshore environment, so they can use that. And the other thing is when they go on the rig, they typically don't have Wi-Fi outside of the accommodation. So the forms are they synchronize the forms before they each morning, say, before they go out onto the outside part of the platform, onto the drill floor, and then they can gather data offline, and then once they come back into the accommodation block at night, they can connect back onto the Wi-Fi and synchronize the data. So it's there's not really any resistance at all, to be honest with you, from our staff.
Well, I suppose if like you say, I can't imagine there would be if ultimately what you're doing is making your employees' lives easier. It would make absolute sense that actually they're fully behind it. There's been a question that's come in for yourself, Peter, which was when fleets are looking at electrifying and digitising their fleets, what sort of timescales do they expect to plan and have the transition happen over?
It's a good question. It just depends really, as you've kind of mentioned previously, mostly what your kind of vehicle replacement cycles are looking like. So, if you start the process of researching and looking into how it can be done, and you've got, a replacement cycle coming up in the next year, it's probably feasible. The biggest challenge is going to be the charging infrastructure to get that installed and in place, ready for that transition to take place is probably the biggest hurdle. But it just depends on the size of the organization, the replacement cycle, the motivation to get it done. But realistically, it's probably not going to be quicker than 6 months. Is probably a really tight time frame to get it turned around, but within a year is definitely feasible, again, but just depends on the replacement cycle and how your kind of fleet operates in that sense.
So following on from that, I suppose you mentioned that one of the key bits is figuring out where and when you're going to charge. There are complaints that when people who currently operate electric fleets go to a charge point, a lot of them either aren't working or not broken, or obviously they're full up and people can't charge and there's a wait to charge their vehicle. Do you know if there's any government initiatives at all to help alleviate this and build the infrastructure to support the move to electrification?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think one of the more important areas of discussion and where solutions need to be found in the UK government's latest kind of environmental announcement that they've come out with recently, which the 2030 ban was a part of. They have announced, I can't remember the exact figures, but I know there's a large chunk of funding that's going out there for charging infrastructure. I don't think the specifics of it have been announced yet, what it's actually going to do, but funnily enough, the Energy Saving Trust have actually had just a roundtable discussion with the government and some key stakeholders about charging infrastructure and specifically vans. And yeah, the main issues there are, one, as you've mentioned, like the accessibility of charge points. And the next big thing is kind of interoperability. So at the minute, it's a large collection of different companies, all operating different apps and different payment methods, and there's 5 different types of charging cables that you can put into your vehicle. Like, there's just a lot of confusion there, and it needs to be simplified, basically. And the other big thing was also just sharing the cost of those of installing this infrastructure. And especially when something which I haven't discussed before is if you need to upgrade your network, upgrade the energy network if you don't have enough available energy to charge vehicles there, you're going to have to pay for network reinforcement, which is not cheap. And I think a lot of people don't think it's fair that the company or whoever's installing that, it should fall on them. So the support looks like it's going to be there. Long story short, but I don't have any specifics as of yet.
No, that's excellent. I think, to be honest, we're going to see a quantum shift over the course of the next 9 years on this transition and build up to 2030 in terms of both how companies are looking at their own fleets, but also how much attention it gets from the government and the local authorities, because they're really going to have to drive this forward and get moving. So that is now 12 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. If we didn't manage to get through and answer any of your questions, we will reply to you individually. Thanks for spending your time with us this morning. In about a month's time, we do have the first episode of our Let's Explore series, which will replace our usual large Webfleet event that we hold annually, because, as you expect, there are current COVID restrictions. So keep your eyes peeled for when we start promoting that. Thank you very much, everybody. Good afternoon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.